Well, our defence analyst Oubai Shahbandar is in Washington, D.C., from where he joins us live now. We just heard there, Oubai, from the US President outlining the rationale behind launching these airstrikes on Syria. It's a very different message to what he was saying only a week ago, isn't it, where he had vowed to get US troops out of Syria very soon.
Well, President Trump made a point to stress that the United States does not seek an indefinite presence in Syria, so it was very notable that he included that statement in his overall speech as he announced these military strikes against the Assad regime. And the point here was to highlight to the American public and to the global community that the US, British, and French strikes were very limited in scope, meant to target the Assad regime's chemical weapon infrastructure and the military bases associated with Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons production and weaponization program. There was a clear intent here by President Trump to also highlight that the U.S. mission remains fixated on fighting Daesh, the last remnants of Daesh in Syria. They're still present there, a few hundred, anywhere to maybe a couple of thousands fighters, and to potentially reach a political solution in Syria. We also heard Secretary of Defense Mattis mention the Geneva process under the auspices of the UN to reach a political solution in Syria. But ultimately, we have to look at the aftermath and the impact of these military strikes. It's the first time that the United States, the British, and the French struck Assad regime targets around the capital. And it's the first time that they've hit the Assad regime on this scope, on this large of a scale, compared to last year when President Trump ordered a strike against one airbase controlled by the Assad regime that was affiliated with the Assad regime's prior use of chemical weapons. So the main question now remains, is Bashar al-Assad deterred from using chemical weapons again in the future given these strikes? And has the Assad regime's chemical weapons production capability, and specifically the Syrian Scientific Research Center, survived? And are they still able to function to provide Bashar al-Assad these precursors and chemical weapons that he uses, that he's used in the past against civilians? So it still remains to be seen the overall military impact of these strikes and whether the Syrian Scientific Research Center, which is in charge of Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons program, has truly been neutralized, and whether Bashar al-Assad himself is really deterred given these strikes. We've seen time and time again in the past that Bashar al-Assad, with the backing of Russia, has been able to continue his illegal and covert maintaining weaponization of advanced chemical weapons, nerve agents, that is used on multiple instances throughout Syria and throughout the suburbs of Damascus. At the end of the day, President Trump reiterated that they are not, that these strikes seem to be very narrow in scope to destroy these chemical weapons and to destroy the chemical weapon facilities run by the Syrian Scientific Research Center. The Assad regime believes that it has survived these attacks and is claiming victory according to regime state media. We'll see whether or not these horrific attacks continue. But let's not forget, at the end of the day, Bashar al-Assad still maintains a significant amount of what we call conventional weapons that he will still be able to use against Syrian civilians. So while one horrific weapon may have been neutralized, Bashar al-Assad still has a variety of weapons at his disposal that he could use as the horrific conflict in Syria continues, whether or not Bashar al-Assad has chemical weapons or not after these strikes.
Yes, and that question about whether these attacks have significantly impacted Syria's chemicals weapons capabilities is a valid one, because in the last hour, Russia's defense ministry has said that the majority of these missiles were intercepted by Syrian government defense systems. Is that a likely claim in your view?
Well, that's very highly unlikely. The Russian military maintains an advanced integrated air defense system outside of the Tartus and Hamaim air base and naval base in northwest Syria. It doesn't seem that the Russians actively used their integrated air defense system on Syrian territory to defend the Assad regime's sensitive military sites and the Syrian scientific research sites in and around Damascus and Homs. We do know that the Assad regime itself does maintain some long-range anti-air missiles, but they are not capable of taking down supersonic cruise missiles and advanced American B-1 bombers and British F-4 Tornadoes. So there's going to be certainly some hyperbole and misinformation on all sides around here. So we have to just wait and see as the dust settles, as the sun has risen in Damascus, and see what the full impact of these strikes are and whether or not the Assad regime was able to vacate some of its chemical weapons and precursors and production facilities prior to these strikes that would allow the Assad regime a measure of survivability to continue to be able to hold these chemical weapons and potentially use them yet again in the future.
Okay, Oubai Shahbandar, our defense analyst in Washington, thank you.